It's great to have the opportunity to be here this morning, talk to all of you a little bit about zero trust at scale. It's an incredibly important topic given what we're seeing in the cybersecurity landscape and how things have evolved over the past few years. I'll take an opportunity today to talk a little bit about zero trust, how we approach that philosophically, and I'll highlight some of the offerings that we have that help implement that. But I think it's very important to highlight and to understand that the philosophy and the approach is fairly consistent across multiple vendors, across different stacks. So the underlying principles don't change, although the product names may change a little bit. It's really exciting to be here in Singapore. The conference has been really exciting to see the progress that GovTech and the government are making towards digitization, and to see all the enthusiasm from all of you around all of these super interesting and pertinent topics. So I really appreciate that. Microsoft is incredibly excited about the opportunity here, and we're trying to draw deeply on our public-private partnerships to help build a digitally resilient Singapore. We're particularly excited about the work we're doing with GovTech to collaborate on the hackathon that'll be running over the next couple months, that'll give all of you opportunities to try and bring forward technologies that can help build the digital future of the country. So that's an incredibly exciting program, and I encourage all of you to take advantage of that. Before I dig into zero trust, I want to highlight a little bit about how we approach cloud. We think of cloud as a global entity, but with local instantiations. We realize that for various reasons, for regulatory reasons, for latency reasons, for sentiment reasons, that it's necessary to have all of our services run in many, many different geographies. In Singapore, in Japan, in Korea, in France, in Germany. So we work very hard to bring most of our services to local instantiations, and that lets you depend on local data residency, where you have a need for that, again, because of latency or regulations. It gives you the opportunity to make sure that your data is stored where you need it to be, and that the appropriate laws and regulations apply. And as we do this, we think deeply about security and compliance in everything we do. We work hard to meet local regulatory and compliance requirements such as OSPAR and SOC and ISO 27001. We build our products from the ground up so that you can trust them and understand that in an enterprise setting, your data is your data, and we are custodians of that for your benefit. So why are we here today talking about zero trust? The challenge is that many of our historical models for enterprise security don't really work anymore. We found that with cyber criminals and advanced adversaries that they've been able to find the weak links. Our traditional model has been one strong network boundary. You took an enterprise and you said, I have a DMZ and a firewall and I use VPN and no one's getting in, and that's why everything is safe. The problem is that that doesn't work anymore. You have users working from home. You're using cloud services. People are using mobile devices. And what we have come to learn is that it only takes one weak link for an adversary to get into your network. So the adversary compromises one device or one end user, and once they're inside, often there are very few protections. Often your critical government or enterprise data is now exposed, and that adversary can move laterally and do all kinds of different things. And that's the fundamental challenge that zero trust tries to adopt. If you think about the world today, 94% of organizations are using the cloud, so not everything is in their boundary. Most users use mobile apps, and they're running things off their phone, and those don't exist within a boundary. There are 7 billion internet-connected devices, and 60% of organizations are allowing bring your own device. So how do you secure your government or your organizational data in this type of new world? We think historically you're catering to users who are employees. They sit in an office and they're using a local network. But today you're extending that to your partners, to your customers, to applications and bots. You can't just assume one set of users that you're addressing. Historically, all devices were corporate owned, but in a world of COVID where everyone had to work from home, or almost everyone, you can't assume that every device is corporate managed or corporate owned. People have their own phones. It's expensive to give everybody a second phone, and most people don't like to carry 2 phones. You're using IoT. You're using sensor data. It's different devices. You need to think about that. Historically, you deployed your key applications on-premise. Your ERM was running on-premise, and you had complete control over it. But now maybe you use Salesforce or Workday or some other SaaS to do your ERP. So you don't have these boundaries. Traditionally, apps were monolithic and you could validate what they did. Today, you are assembling applications through different pieces on the web. You're putting things together. You're sharing data through various network protocols and APIs. Historically, you knew what your network and your firewall looked like. That's no longer true. And even more disturbing, historically, when you said, I know what my network looks like, I have a firewall, I'm going to do layer 7 packet inspection, and I'm going to know what's going on. Well, that doesn't work anymore. Turns out that most of the traffic you see going in and out, not only is it encrypted, if it wasn't encrypted, you wouldn't understand anything about the protocol. You'd look at a bunch of REST packets, and you'd say, I don't know what's going on. So layer 7 inspection no longer protects you the same way that it did. So zero trust assumes that trust must be validated at every step. First off, you have to change your underlying understanding and say, I don't have a castle that no one's going to get into. We all now think in terms of assumed breach. We assume that an attacker will compromise an end user. An attacker will compromise an endpoint. It's not unlikely that an attacker will compromise one of your servers or one of your applications. And you need to be prepared for that, and you need to design for that. And that means that you need to verify trust explicitly at every level. You need to know whether or not you can trust a user and their authentication, a device, an application. You need systems that are looking at the data and telemetry and letting you make these risk assessments. Things are not always black and white. You see shades of gray, and you have to understand where you want to take risks and what risks you're taking. And almost as important is consistently using least privilege. If you assume that your users, that your admins, that your endpoints will be compromised at some point, you want to make sure that each one of those has as little privilege as you can possibly get away with. You don't want to make your entire corporate or government network a sweet spot where if the attacker gets in, they can move wherever they want. They can move laterally and they own you. You want to say, well, you got that device, but you can't get any further. So least privilege access becomes a key part of zero trust. And Microsoft's actually working with NIST, the Open Group, and others to try and harmonize these definitions and models and architectures for zero trust, because we know you work in a multi-vendor world. There's no world where everybody uses our software alone or anyone else's software alone. You need these things to work together. So when we look at zero trust, we look across a set of dimensions. We look across identity and endpoints. And then we look at what are you doing to secure your network? What are you doing to secure your data, your applications, and your infrastructure. And you need to look at each one of those individually and understand what you can do. And then you need to look at them collectively and understand how explicitly verifying trust for each of those gives you the power to protect your organization against today's advanced adversaries. The objectives of Zero Trust are to consistently apply policy to verify every identity with strong authentication, to allow only devices that you should trust to be on your network. Are they fully patched? Have they been rooted? Do they have malware on them? You want to know the answer to these questions before you allow that device to talk to your critical applications and access critical enterprise and government data. And the burden on security operations has never been higher. Your mission is to protect sensitive data wherever it lives and travels. And you see data moving around between applications. It makes it much, much more difficult. You need to make sure that you know what applications are being used, where and who is using them, and what they're accessing. And you need to invest in hardening your defenses so that you have the ability to detect and respond to threats in real time. And don't underestimate that. It is enormously difficult to consistently detect today's adversaries and to know how to respond faster than they can move laterally. Your biggest vulnerabilities and your first line of defense are always going to be identity and endpoints. 80% of security breaches involve the use of stolen credentials or passwords. Your users, as much as you enforce strong passwords, as much as you tell people, don't write that down and slip it under your keyboard, don't use this on your corporate network and on your Facebook account, people do it anyway. And you have to protect against that because you can't prevent it. And 60% of bring your own devices aren't secured. 60% of the devices reaching into enterprise data may not have a known state. They may be compromised, hopefully not 60%, but you don't know if you don't know. So let's spend a minute and talk about securing identity. Identity is at the core of everything today. It's at the core of cloud access. It's at the core of your on-premise systems. And I'll talk about 3 steps to securing your identities. The first is to build one consistent identity infrastructure so that you have integration with your HR and line of business systems. And when people quit, their accounts get closed down. You want one directory and you want one consistent set of signal so that you can see what that end user is doing. But maybe it's not an end user, maybe it's an adversary pretending to be your end user. So what you first want to do is make sure that every identity is validated with multi-factor authentication. And there are all kinds of opportunities to use MFA. Some are stronger and more convenient than others, and you have to make a choice for your organization as to what's reasonable. You can use phone-based apps, you can use fingerprints, you can use security keys or RSA fobs, you can use biometrics. You have a lot of choices. I can't tell you that I know for every circumstance which is the right one, but it is critically important that username password is not all that it takes to get into your systems, because those username and passwords will be pwned and you will see people come in. We believe that using effective multi-factor authentication prevents as much as 99.9% of identity attacks. Traditional rainbow attacks aren't particularly useful if there's another factor, because the adversary doesn't have access to the phone or the RSA fob. And once you know this, and you can look at how is that user authenticating from where are they authenticating, you can then apply policies and risk assessments. And you can do this based on the data they're accessing. You can say if they're accessing, our internal portal that says what's on the lunch menu, maybe we don't force MFA every morning. But if they're accessing payroll data or significant IP, we do require MFA. We maybe block access if they're not in the corporate network, if they're overseas. Once you have a strong identity system, you can build policies that protect your data estate based on that. Secondly, you need to secure your endpoints. And the critical aspect will be combining the visibility. But first, let's talk a minute about how do you secure your endpoint. The first and most important piece is to make sure that you have visibility into the health and compliance of a device. If it's a phone, you need to know whether it's been rooted, whether or not it has the latest security patches. If it's a PC, is it patched? Is there malware? You can use Defender for endpoints. You can use a bunch of third-party products from Symantec, from Lookout, to make sure you understand the state of those devices. And then you can use device management to actually manage the state and to apply policy. You want to know whether that device has no password, whether it has, a 2-character PIN, or whether it has some strong authentication to force users to use biometrics to log in. And we offer Intune to do this, and you certainly have other opportunities in the market to make sure that you secure those devices. Once you've done that, you have the opportunity to make access decisions based on the state of the device, and optimally based on both the state of the device and what you know about the end user. If you see a device that's completely unsecured and the user hasn't provided MFA, you're not going to want to give them access to anything that's sensitive. But you can make those choices. Again, there may be data elements, what's for lunch, where you don't need secured devices. But then there are critical elements where you want to know everything's in a row. You want to be able to enroll those devices and enforce security policies on those devices. And you have multiple choices. You can use full mobile device management where you are able to apply policy to the entire device. You're able to see what that device does, and you're able to wipe corporate data off that device or wipe the entire device if you believe it's been compromised. You have a lighter weight choice. Users, particularly in BYOD situations, don't always like the idea that if you get itchy, you're going to delete all the pictures of their family. So sometimes mobile application management, particularly for BYOD, makes more sense because you can set policy for the applications. You can make sure that the applications don't share data across the mobile device, and you can wipe the corporate data while leaving somebody's pictures and other private data untouched. And we're continuing to invest in advanced endpoint management across our Intune products, enabling you to force VPN access, automated vulnerability management, and other pieces. Across our offerings and other vendors, we will all be investing in this, because if you can't trust the device, it's just like not being able to trust the end user. There's no way you can allow sensitive data onto a device that you can't fully verify. Another evolution we talked about at the beginning is an evolution of applications. You're now not running large monolithic systems on premise. You are using all kinds of different applications. And it turns out that data flows where users want it to flow. They go and experiment, what we call shadow IT. They may try and use applications that you don't know about. You need the ability to discover what applications are being used and make risk assessments. You need to block or be able to block unsanctioned apps accessing your critical corporate data, and only approve applications that you know about being used by users that you trust. And a critical element here is being able to extend your risk management into the sessions of those applications. It's not a binary choice. It's not black and white, yes or no. You need to be able to look at how much data is it accessing, how often, what files, what else are they doing. If it's downloading all of your data, you may decide to block it, whereas if it's just accessing one piece and it seems like a normal user pattern, you let it go. But you need the telemetry and you need the discoverability of these applications to make those risk decisions and to protect your data estate. We integrate across the industry because, again, it's not a single vendor world. You should be able to get data on applications and on identities across all of the different icons, all the different offerings you see up on the screen. You want to know what privileges those users have and detect malicious use of administrative accounts, of end users, indications of compromise. It's incredibly important to understand that application infrastructure. The next piece is to think about how do you protect your data. And you say, well, Paul, data's data, how do I protect it? The first thing to do is to understand and to classify your data so that you know what is critically sensitive and what's not that sensitive. There are ways to do that. You can force tagging for some data you know. There are offerings that integrate with things like Word and Excel that will do auto classification based on keywords and other pattern recognition. These are things that you do. You may then integrate that with DLP, with other pieces where based on that classification determination, based on whether you saw a credit card number or a health ID or a national ID number, you may classify that artifact as being higher sensitivity and not allow it to be shared or impose restrictions on where it can go or what the retention policy is. We also offer the ability to do classification of documents and emails so that they protect themselves. The ability to mark a document as highly sensitive and say, only employees of my organization or only these 4 people can open the document. And the document itself is encrypted, and when a user gets it, they go to a key server and they have to use strong authentication to get a key and open it. We need to move to mechanisms where data can protect itself, because otherwise, once data is out of your purview, you don't have any control over it, and you don't know where it's going. And lastly, we need to talk a little bit about how to evolve your infrastructure. If you look at the attack chains that today's adversaries are using, you begin to see how complex they are and how creative and advanced these attackers are. They may come in through phishing, they may come in through IoT devices, they may try and compromise a 0-day. So you need all the telemetry you can get so that you can understand whether you have risks, whether you have issues, whether you have a breach, and then you need to figure out what you're going to do about it. In the Microsoft suite, we offer Defender for Office, which gives you signals across phishing and does attachment detonation. Across IoT, you need that signal. You need to use something to secure your endpoints. You need to be able to do identity protection. You need to be able to apply conditional access so that potentially you use network segments as a protection. Again, not your only protection, but you can make different decisions. You can use things like Defender for Identity, which give you signals on your on-premise ADFS and other AD infrastructure so that you can correlate the activities of an adversary across not only your on-prem infrastructure, but into the cloud, and look at those correlations and look for patterns. And you have Defender for Cloud Apps, which allows you to put in place reverse proxies, and other mechanisms that control data flow in and out. It's important in this world to think about, what do you want on devices? You can use virtual desktops, whether it's AVD, whether it's Citrix. You may decide for some data, it can't be on my end user devices. I need it to stay in the cloud. I don't trust home machines. Some organizations are so secure, they don't even trust desktop machines in their own offices. Crazy glue in the USB port isn't a perfect solution. You may want to say that data is on a virtual desktop and it never comes down. It's important in today's world to think about those trade-offs and find that balance between end user experience and security. If your users hate it, they're not going to use it. They're going to find a way to go around you and use another product. But on the other hand, if you provide no security, you're not going to keep your job. So it's finding this balance and using these pieces that we've talked about to secure your estate so that you deliver a reasonable end user experience and you understand your security posture. The worst piece is not understanding your security posture. You even need to worry about insider risk. Not only do you have adversaries, you may have employees who, for one reason or another, want to take data. Maybe they just want to hurt you. Maybe they want to sell it. We're offering insider risk management, as are other vendors, that allow you to analyze what you know about the user, histories of violations, whether they've been careless, what data they're accessing, how much data they're accessing, and then you can get alerts and make decisions so that you are not caught flat-footed and discover that one of your admins has taken all your critical IP. So to sum up, the three lessons that you want to think about around zero trust is not all or nothing. You can start with identity, you can start with endpoint, but you need to move in that direction, because if you don't have internal boundaries, if you assume that you're going to keep everyone out, the day that you're wrong, you've lost everything. You can get quick wins to drive towards your North Star. Device management, multi-factor auth, all of these things are relatively easy to implement and improve your security posture dramatically as soon as you turn them on. And you'll almost certainly want to use a phased approach and close your most exploitable vulnerabilities first. You're not ever going to get to a perfect posture, but you need to think, how do you start with identities, devices, and apps? How do you protect your data? And then how do you invest in detection and response capabilities? And I'll tell you, even running a scaled cloud service, we are always learning about detective capabilities. We're always thinking about remediation. Can you rebuild your infrastructure? When we saw NotPetya, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago, I had customers who called me and said, all my directory servers are gone. What do I do? If you don't have automation to rebuild that, your entire enterprise may be down for weeks. You want to think about, I have directory servers that are compromised. How do I repave them? Because I don't know what the persistence mechanism might be, and I can't guarantee that I've evicted an attacker unless I've repaved all my infrastructure. So that third phase, we could spend another hour on it, but we don't have another hour. So I'm going to wrap up here. You're welcome to go look at more information on our Zero Trust website. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you today. I am really energized by your enthusiasm and by the entirety of the conference. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.